Throughout history, people have built shelters to keep out the elements, from modest huts to the most elaborate mansions. Some of the most popular places to build are near coastlines, with their beautiful vistas and easy access to the beach. But when the weather turns wild, not even the best built houses can withstand the forces of nature. In southwestern British Columbia, halfway between the Whistler Ski Resort and West Vancouver, is the tiny community of Britannia Beach, once home to the richest copper mine in the province. In 1915, Britannia Beach is a typical company town, born of and totally dependent on the copper mine above it. Everything is owned by the Britannia Mining and Smelting Company.
The company was very parental in nature in many respects. We had all sorts of things constructed for social purposes, i.e. a community hall, a gymnasium, tennis courts, swimming pools, and also during the summertime we had a good softball field.
By March, the mining operation is in full swing. One of its underground surveyors is a young man named Carlton Browning. This is his first job since graduating mining school less than a year earlier. March 22nd, 1915. As midnight approaches, most residents in the mining camp above the beach are asleep. It's a congested site that includes crew bunkhouses, single-family units, and a school.
The first indication that there was a problem was the lights had gone off the powerhouse down at the 2200 level, so they realized something drastic had happened up there.
High above the camp, a mass of snow, rock, and mud gives way.
It was unexpected. It's just one of those unfortunate situations where you've got a heavy rainfall and a wet snowpack, and down it came, right through the camp.
The debris flow swept right through the middle of the camp. There were bunkhouses, there were houses, there were other buildings that were just totally destroyed, broken up into bits and pieces, most of them covered up with debris.
The slide takes only a few minutes, but leaves 57 dead and 22 injured. Survivor Carlton Browning can see that the seaside community down below is safe. The next time disaster strikes, however, Britannia Beach and Carlton Browning will not be so lucky. Friday, October 28th, 1921. In the 6 years since the 1915 slide, Carlton Browning has become superintendent of the mine. He has also had a hand in the construction of a new town site on Britannia Mountain.
There was always a community at the beach, but about 3 or 4 kilometers up the Britannia Creek Valley was another town site. And in the latter years, it became known as the Mount Shear town site.
The beach community has enjoyed substantial growth of its own, including the construction of a new mill, new homes, and a 6-story company store. By 1921, there are several dams above and below the Mount Shear town site. The largest is the Tunnel Dam near the mine entrance, providing water for the mine, the mill, and the 2 communities.
1921 would have been the beginning of the very productive years for the mining operation here. Some of the earlier hurdles were over with, and we were getting into large tonnage production, and most of the infrastructure was complete and built.
One hurdle that Carlton Browning feels he has overcome is the huge railway embankment behind the Tunnel Dam. Built from waste rock from the mine, it provides a foundation for rail lines going across Britannia Creek. During heavy runoff, the embankment often holds back more water than the concrete dams below it. Superintendent Browning orders the construction of a wooden culvert, creating a tunnel through the embankment to improve water flow.
The box culvert is just a square opening to allow the creek to pass through, and in this case, the box culvert was constructed out of large timber in the bottom of Britannia Creek.
On this particular Friday, it appears to be working well, as runoff from the swollen creek rushes through. By day's end, it will be the catalyst for a disaster that no one in Britannia Beach could ever imagine. Friday, October 28th, 1921. It has been raining hard all night, and water is already flooding yards in the community of Britannia Beach.
There was a relatively heavy snowpack in October, further up Mount Shear. There were extremely heavy rains in the order of 5.5 inches, 6 inches of rain on the Thursday night, so the creeks would just be roaring.
On the beach, mine manager Edward Donahue notices that the bridge to the hospital is in danger of washing out. He orders a crew of men to protect it. Alexander Mackenzie heads off to work the day shift at the nearby powerhouse. He looks forward to spending the evening at home with his wife and 2 daughters, Thelma and Kathleen.
It was a very comfortable house, 2 bedrooms and a large kitchen, which was sort of the center of the family, and a small living room. And it was owned by the company. No one owned their own property or their house.
Normally, Bob McKnight would be with his family too, but they are on a trip to Vancouver, and he is staying at the local hotel.
My father, he was in the beach proper. He was the electrical superintendent of the company, so he went out to work every morning at the crack of dawn.
Swedish immigrants Johanna and Olaf Swanson have been in Britannia Beach since 1914. They have 2 teenage daughters, Greta and Hannah.
My mother would have been 15 years of age, and my aunt would have been 14 at the time. My mother was extremely musical, played violin beautifully, and her lessons as a youngster were taken at Britannia.
Alan Stewart and his family have come all the way from Prince Edward Island to find work. Now, Alan works as a clerk in the beach community's company store.
My father's job was to meet the boat and make sure that all the things that they were supposed to be getting were checked off.
38-year-old contractor Fred Downing has been hauling supplies to the upper town site. He hopes to catch that same boat back to Vancouver later that afternoon. Despite the rain, warm air causes packed snow to melt on the mountain slopes. At the upper town site, there is more water behind the railway embankment than all the dams below it. When logs and debris block the embankment's wooden culvert, Superintendent Carlton Browning sends men to clear it. The crew builds a large V-shaped guard in front of the culvert to prevent further jamming. The crew is happy with the increased water flow, but miner Vic Brister is alarmed by what he sees.
The water was rushing to go through that hole so that some of it would eddy on each side, and it would cut into the loose muck and just wash the muck out. I saw right away that the culvert was going to go out.
Brister is so concerned that he warns family members who live in Britannia Beach, but does not speak to company officials.
It was not my place to warn them. The company had men there looking after it, and I would not have been thanked if I'd said anything.
As far as company officials are concerned, a warning is not necessary. Superintendent Browning is relieved to see the water levels behind the embankment drop during the afternoon. The water is still flowing well at 8:30 that evening. Then, the day's steady rain turns into a heavy downpour. Carlton Browning arranges for a detail of men to watch the bridges at Britannia Beach. James Emmett is at the furthest end of the beach, looking after a small footbridge. Pipefitter Bert King is stationed close to the railway bridge at the base of the tracks. He can see James Emmett from where he stands.
I thought I would take a walk over and see how he was getting on, being as the waters were pretty high. We could hardly hear anything with the roar of the creek. By Mr. Emmett's watch, 9:15, he says to me, 3 more hours and we go home.
Fred Downing has missed the afternoon boat and is staying at the home of friends Jack and Helen Godden. Not far away, mine electrician Bob McKnight has just returned to his hotel.
He used to go to a friend's home once a week and have a bath. And he often stayed and played cards with them. But this night he decided no, he'd go right home and take a hot drink and go to bed. And so when he got home, he did what he said he was going to do, but the lights went out.
Friday, October 28th, 1921. In the small community of Britannia Beach, British Columbia, Mrs. Handel Hawkins walks home after her music lesson at the local movie hall. It is almost 9:30 p.m. 4 kilometers up the mountain, not far from the town site known as Mount Shear, 14 million gallons of water have been building up behind a railway embankment. At 9:30 p.m., that embankment gives way.
The debris flow started at the Mount Shear town site. So the Mount Shear town site itself was not affected, but all of that material came sweeping down the Britannia Creek Valley.
People working underground wouldn't have known anything about it, and people living on the creek would have heard this massive roar of water going by, and the people at the beach wouldn't have heard the flood coming.
Mine Superintendent Carlton Browning sees the huge flow roaring down the creek bed in a solid mass over 6 meters deep.
I ran for the phone immediately. I saw a lot of timber and knew there was a condition that they needed warning of at the beach.
It is already too late. The rush of water pours over the tunnel dam and scours the creek bed, taking trees, boulders, and debris with it.
The water that broke in the first place was above the dam. And then when it hit the dam, it just forced all the water that was in the dam out and left all the junk that it brought down. It moved all the muck and logs and everything else into the dam, and the water ran over it. And there were 2 more dams down below, and the same thing happened there. So all of the water that came, it wasn't held up by the dams because they were full of debris.
The flood surges down a walled canyon that inclines sharply 36 meters to the beach. The sudden drop causes the water mass to accelerate even more, splitting it in two.
It was a steep valley down to the flat fan, and just about at this point, it cut itself a new path right through an area that was covered with miners' cottages and the homes of the workers and their buildings. And from there, of course, it just spewed out. It spread out and covered a wide area.
It's just like aiming a hose at the town. It came straight out and just slaughtered the buildings.
Watchman Bert King tries to warn James Emmett.
I shouted to him, "Jim, there is a flood!" And I heard him holler, and that is the last I did hear of him, along with the crash of buildings behind me.
As power lines go down, Bob McKnight hurries outside.
Daddy went out on the porch, but his feet began to get wet. So he stood up on the railing, which was maybe 9 feet. Then the water came up to his feet.
Mrs. Handel Hawkins tries to run, but is swept away by the rushing torrent. Olaf Swanson and his family find the powerful rush of water right at their doorstep.
And they sort of were behind this huge oak round dining room table, and my grandfather apparently picked my grandmother up and put her on the table, and a log came crashing through the house and smacked into the pedestal of the dining room table. And I was told that if it weren't for that dining room table, probably there would have been fatalities within the family.
The water forces the home of Alexander Mackenzie right off its foundation, pushing it towards Howe Sound and the open sea.
I can remember vividly the feel of the house moving down to the sea, and I can see us to this day saying a prayer, and it was answered when the house hit a tree that hadn't been uprooted, and it really saved us because we were quite close to the ocean.
Many of the Mackenzies' neighbors aren't so fortunate.
The houses that were in the flood path were just absolutely shattered to pieces. And I know my aunt could remember children calling that were out in the houses that had been swept out into the Sound.
The rending of homes from their foundations actually saves the lives of Alan Stewart and his family.
Next door to us on the east side was the school principal's house. And when the flood hit it, it knocked it off the foundation and sat it down right beside our house. So everything that came after that, all the flood water, hit the Smith's house, and ours was protected. But when the water levels slackened off, then my father went out to see if he could help retrieve the people who were in trouble.
Neighbor William Matheson is doing the same. Although their home is badly damaged, he and his wife are uninjured and are trying to help those in need.
They were either practically drowned or in the creek and had to be pulled out, or they were pinned under debris and had to be released where possible.
Bob McKnight hurries to the home of a close friend and arrives just in time.
This wall of the bedroom had been forced against the other wall, and a little cribble was between the two walls, and Daddy pulled little George Schooler out by his leg, and everybody rejoiced with him. He was just an infant.
Elizabeth Mitchell's mother and her family are trapped in their house until a neighbor arrives to help.
His name was Carl Berg. He tried to come and get them out of the house with his boat, but he couldn't get in. I guess the water was so high. So what they did was they went up into the attic, made a hole out into the roof, and Carl Berg went and got a ladder, and with the help of the ladder and Carl Berg and the boat, they survived.
Some of the rescued aren't as lucky. One woman clings to a small puppy, the only other survivor of her entire family. Saturday, October 29th, 1921. What's left of Britannia Beach is mired in a mass of mud, rock, and logs.
What leaps to my mind is the calmness of the ocean the next morning. The thing was perfectly calm, as if nothing had happened, except you could see the houses floating around in the Sound. People were being picked off from the houses. They'd spend the night on the roof. So the next day they collected them.
Of the 110 homes on the beach, 55 are completely destroyed. 37 people are dead, with 22 injured. 9 bodies are never recovered. Night watchman James Emmett and Mrs. Handel Hawkins are among the dead. So is Fred Downing and friend Jack Godden's wife and daughter.
I think it would be hard because, in a community like that, everybody knows everybody else anyway. You live in a big city, you don't even have to know your next door neighbor, but in a community like Britannia, everybody knew everybody, and we're very close.
At the inquest, civil engineers identify the railway embankment as the main cause of the disaster. Engineer George Haynes is one of the witnesses.
The embankment had no margin of safety or engineering principle to it at all. If there was any seepage around the culvert, the least bit of signs of loosening of earth or material around, the whole thing would go.
In its final verdict, the jury also cites company officials who built the embankment in the first place, including Mine Superintendent Carlton Browning. As part of the reconstruction of the beach community, a steel suspension bridge replaces the embankment and culvert across Britannia Creek. The mine continues to operate for another 50 years, finally closing in 1974. But for Carlton Browning, life after October 28, 1921 is never the same.
It was a New York company, Britannia, and he had to go back to New York to be questioned. He was cleared of any negligence, but it haunted him throughout his life. Years later, he's still worried about, could he have helped it?
"53 years later, another day will change lives forever. On Christmas Eve, 1974, an incredible force of nature sweeps through northern Australia, altering the landscape permanently. Darwin, Australia is a small tropical city on the country's northern coastline, far from the big cities of Sydney and Melbourne. It is known for its isolation and transient population.
It's an awful long way from anywhere else, thousands of kilometres from the rest of Australia. It was an unusual community to live in because almost nobody had grown up and lived there all their life. Everyone came from somewhere else around Australia.
In 1974, Darwin is home to 50,000 people, many of whom have been transferred to work in government jobs, a common bond that draws people together, especially at Christmas. Julie Tamo, her husband Heike, and young sons Rowan and Brendan are typical residents.
We had a huge circle of friends that were all just young marrieds with young children. We used to do things like go and play squash during the day, take the kids and go water skiing during the day.
In Australia, Christmas happens during the hottest and most humid season. Perfect conditions for a tropical storm.
Lots of lightning, thunder, wind, rain, heavy, heavy rain. Like sometimes you can be driving a car along the road and the rain's so heavy you have to stop.
Every year, between December and sometimes right up until May, there's cyclones gathering around the place. So there's cyclone warning, cyclone alerts, usually just be on the lookout. There's a cyclone hanging around or forming.
In December 1974, a cyclone is forming off Australia's northern coast in the Arafura Sea. But it's a small, slow-moving storm, and experts are sure it won't touch the city.
We'd been putting out warnings, telling people it was there, but that it wasn't a threat to Darwin.
Jeff Crane has been working as a meteorologist in Darwin for 6 years and has seen dozens of cyclones.
Tropical cyclone is a concentration of energy in a small space, and it's a tropical revolving storm. Now, they're called different things in different parts of the world. In the Americas, they're hurricanes. In Asia, they're typhoons. In Australia and a few other parts of the world, we just call them tropical cyclones, but they're all the same thing.
But on December 24th, Julie Tamo is more concerned with Christmas preparations than the weather.
I think the last cyclone that really, destroyed Darwin was in the late 1800s sometime. And because so many cyclones came close and didn't actually strike with the full force, you got lulled into a false sense of security, really.
In a nearby suburb, Helima Douth and her children, Lisa and Simone, are also preparing for Christmas.
I really loved Darwin. Compared to Sydney or any of the other cities, multicultural. And you just about knew everybody, because if you went to school here, you just about knew everybody.
Making the Christmas rounds that day is Mrs. Butler, a family friend. The children play with her dog while she and Halima chat. The wind is picking up and it's beginning to rain, but they pay little attention. In the heart of Darwin, far from the suburbs, Robert Wesley Smith lives on the ground floor of a sturdy apartment building.
This was a big old building that everybody sort of said, these are great buildings, a lot of space and really solid construction.
Newly single, Robert plans to spend Christmas Day with his colleagues, George and Madeline Parker.
As a couple, professional couple, they were making careers for themselves, and George had just given his first scientific paper.
Like Julie and Halima, Robert is not the least bit worried about the weather.
People were blasé. There's this attitude that you live with storms.
Also near the center of town is the home of Edwin Milliken, his wife Elva, and their daughter Jane. They're one of the few families taking the cyclone seriously.
We talked about the fact that it was 33 years since the last cyclone had hit Darwin, and we reckoned we were about due for another. We'd laid in extra water supplies, we'd bought some gas, a gas cooker, and things of this sort.
As the day progresses, Julie's son Rowan becomes ill, and she takes him to the hospital. The doctor decides to keep him overnight for observation.
Which was really upsetting because it's Christmas Eve and he was pretty upset about it.
On her way home, the ocean catches her attention.
It was really overcast and almost getting dark. It looked unusual, like I hadn't really seen before, like it was boiling. But not big waves, just boiling, like it was almost, I couldn't say it was bubbling, but that kind of effect.
The Millikens have a study on the lower level, and they plan to spend the night tucked away downstairs, just in case.
The drizzle increased, but nobody took any notice of, except that you knew it was the edge of the cyclone.
As night falls, the Douth family gets ready for bed. The weather is worsening, and Halima checks the television for cyclone warnings.
By then the storm was really blowing and whipping up and bashing against the sort of coming right in the back patio. So I got up, had a look out the back doors, which the sea was behind that, so the wind was quite strong coming from there. And I went back to the TV. There was no warnings on TV, so I thought, oh, can't be too bad.
But unknown to everyone in Darwin, the cyclone is in fact heading straight for them. Back at home, Julie tells Heike about the ominous water. Neither of them knows that weather officials are now in a state of panic.
We had to make a very quick decision to change the whole story, to change the whole warning strategy and say it's not going past, it's now coming back towards Darwin.
In the Douth household, Halima is getting worried. She's heard high winds before, but this time it's different. Seconds later, everything changes.
I heard a car going along Lakeside Drive and they had one of those loudspeakers, that you speak into, and they said, the cyclone is imminent, everybody stay indoors, don't leave your homes, stay indoors, the cyclone's imminent. And that's the first inkling I had that the cyclone was coming.
Horrified, Halima wakes her husband. They decide to move the girls to their room and huddle on the bed.
It wasn't too long when it just got so bad. The wind was really, really strong.
The winds are now whipping torrential rain at 220 kilometers per hour. At midnight, Cyclone Tracy hits Darwin with a force that few have ever felt. As it engulfs Halima's home, she has a vision.
It's as though the Lord himself told me what to do. I knew exactly what to do, and I said to David, we've got to get the dining room table and we've got to put it in between the kitchen cupboards. So we all got under the table.
Seconds later, a thunderous sound occurs as their roof is torn away and sent flying by the cyclone.
He actually heard it peeling off just like paper, and that was the most horrific noise. I never actually saw anything fall in, or I just heard all these terrific noises. But you can imagine all the roofs and tin flying around everywhere. I had one girl on this leg and one girl on this leg, and I was hanging on to them for grim death. I thought, I'm not letting them go for anything. If we go, we all go together. You know, at least I go with the girls. I didn't want them to know that I was scared, so I was acting, you know, really brave. But my legs underneath each girl were shaking like, and I had no control over them.
At Julie Tamo's house, Cyclone Tracy is just hitting.
Water started pouring through the closed louvers like they weren't even closed. It just was pouring in, like as if people were tipping buckets through the windows, you know, with water. And water, the house started flooding.
As Heike tries mopping up the water, Julie realizes this is no ordinary storm.
I just had this horrible feeling, and I ran down to the bedroom and grabbed our 2-year-old son, and as I was running back up the passage holding him, the whole roof just peeled off. It just went rip, and it just ripped completely off.
The house continues to disintegrate around her.
Our bedroom blew away, his bedroom blew away. I just got him out of his bed by seconds before he would have been completely blown away.
Julie is hit in the head with flying debris, but isn't seriously hurt. Heike tries desperately to herd his family into the bathroom.
And he was standing with his back to the door, trying to hold it, and something came straight through the door and hit him in the back of the head. I was able to pull him into the toilet and get him curled around the base of the toilet. And so he was curled around the toilet, and I've got Brendan in front of me and my legs either side. And then Heike came to, and he's just saying, oh, my head, you know, and he put his hand up, and he could put his fingers all in the back of his head. It was just all split open at the back.
The power is now out in the entire city. It is pitch black, except for tremendous bursts of lightning. The winds pound Darwin through the night. Glass, iron, and wood become deadly missiles as they fly at enormous speeds. Keeping low, Julie holds Brendan with all her might.
His little body was just like that, shaking and shaking, you know, never made a sound all night. And then the wall between the toilet and the kitchen just disappeared. And the fridge that was backing onto that wall, it just took off, like it just flew through the air. So the kitchen blew away, the cupboards, the sink, and we were just so totally exposed.
Holding on to nothing more than some pipes, Julie begins to fear the worst.
When I saw the fridge blowing through the air, I thought, that's it, we're going to die. You know, I really actually thought we were going to die. I think I might have even said it, you know, screaming and whatever. You know, you've got a child there, but you just can't help it, that it's so terrifying.
In the city center, things are just as bad.
And I actually woke up with the cyclone howling, and the power was off. There was branches and timber flying through my windows, and one quite substantial piece of wood came through, and you know, it just missed me.
Robert Wesley Smith finds shelter in his kitchen.
Yeah, I went and sat behind the refrigerator, which gave protection from one side and the wall of the kitchen from the other. And
at the Milliken house, the noise is ear-shattering. In the basement where they have taken shelter, Edwin and his family have no idea what is happening in the rest of the house.
What we thought was a wall going must have been the final sheet of the roof. thumping and thumping, and finally it went and was blown off.
Then suddenly, all is calm. As quickly as they descend, the winds are gone.
From the sudden screaming fury, it was suddenly still and silent.
It went really, really quiet, but not for very long.
And then the fury broke again.
The cyclone is doing the unthinkable, making a U-turn and heading straight back for Darwin. All anyone can do is hold on and pray. Christmas 1974 is a day the people of Darwin, Australia will never forget. At midnight, Cyclone Tracy, the most violent storm in the city's history, rips through town, then turns around and levels almost everything still standing. The next morning, Halima Douth and her family crawl out from under the kitchen table, exhausted and shaken, completely unprepared for the scene around them.
Just like what pictures you see of Nagasaki and Hiroshima. You know, it just looked like a bomb blast.
Nearly all the houses in Darwin are destroyed. Incredibly, Edwin Milliken's home is relatively unscathed.
It wasn't quite as bad as it sounded, actually. When we got up there, the glass louvers were gone, but the structure of the house was still there.
His neighbors aren't as lucky.
I haven't felt so close to weeping when I saw the devastation of the houses. The whole thing that came through to me was that it seemed obscene.
Julie Tamo and her family survived the night in the bathroom. Heike's head is no longer bleeding, but they have no idea what has happened to their other son, who spent the night in hospital.
But all this time, of course, I was thinking about Rowan in the hospital.
With their car destroyed by fallen trees, a friend drives the Tamo family to the hospital. The road is a treacherous obstacle course.
There was just rubbish all over the streets, but you just went over the rubbish, flat tyres, the lot.
When they arrive at the hospital, they learn that the children have escaped harm by being moved to the lowest floor. Rowan is safe and feeling better, but has little idea what has transpired.
How you could explain to him that the whole town's basically been destroyed, from what we could see anyway.
Many of the dead and injured are arriving at the hospital. One of them is Halima's friend, Mrs. Butler. It is a particularly sad and gruesome sight.
Apparently her dog ran out of the house, and she must have loved her dog so much. She went out after the dog, and they found her with she was decapitated.
Sheltered by the strong walls of his older apartment building, Robert Wesley Smith emerges to help those he can.
I went up to the police station and the hospital to see if I could help.
Robert soon learns that his friends George and Madeline are also victims of Cyclone Tracy, struck by objects flying through the air.
I think they tried to get down into their car, but they didn't make it, and the guy got hit with a flying steel picket, and she's obviously been hit by one of these sheets of flying iron.
There was a lot of corrugated iron, and you could imagine corrugated sheeting iron is like, you know, flying saw blades.
Although Madeline's injuries are severe, she survives. George does not. There is no power, no water, and no shelter. Devastation is everywhere, but the people of Darwin rally as best they can.
There was a lot of comradeship developed between people, you know, how it does in adversity, and brought people together.
Everybody, worked hard, and what they were primarily concerned about was not so much getting their own houses going, but getting life going in Darwin again.
Soon, the military arrives. For health and safety reasons, officials decide to evacuate 25,000 people. They won't be allowed to return for months.
The infrastructure just couldn't sustain the people at the time. I think if too many people had stayed there for too long, things like dysentery and other diseases could have been prevalent, especially how hot it was.
When it is all over, 65 people are dead and hundreds are injured. Damage is estimated at close to $1 billion US. An inquiry finds that there are major problems with housing construction, most of it built by and for government workers.
These houses were not properly built, they were not properly braced, even to the design criteria that was there. And once one house starts to collapse, the debris from that hits another, and it's like a pack of cards. So those new suburbs were devastated.
Blame is also directed at city officials who didn't warn people in time. They in turn point to unreliable technology.
We had a radar which can't see cyclones until they get to within a couple of 100 kilometres. In fact, the way to see what was happening on a radar was very primitive.
After the inquiry, changes are made. Technology and warning systems are continuously updated.
These days, if you want to see what a weather radar is doing, you log onto the web and there it is. We've progressively refined and strengthened the action phrases in warnings. It's become well known that telling people something, that something's there, doesn't necessarily prompt them to do anything. You've virtually got to tell them to do something.
Tougher housing codes are also put in place, many of which are adopted in other cyclone-prone areas of Australia. The people of Darwin rebuild their houses, but it takes a long time to rebuild their lives.
There was a lot of tragedy, and it was very traumatic afterwards for people. I know myself that I probably went through 3 months of, I suppose, what you'd call some sort of nervous breakdown.
In my case, the structure of the building was solid. In a way, I feel, I had a pretty light experience of the actual cyclone. For some people, it was a real horror story, and some people were so shocked because maybe they're hiding there with a child, and some get killed and some get sucked out into the air and that sort of thing, and the house falls down around them. That's a horror story that you can't blame anyone from being shocked for the rest of their lives, really.
They really never ever spoke about the cyclone.
Halima Douth's daughters Lisa and Simone and her husband David have done their best to push Cyclone Tracy from their minds.
And I've never even asked them what they actually remember or if they remember anything. And David prefers to forget about it.
Today, the disasters at Darwin and Britannia Beach live on in the hearts and minds of thousands. Britannia Beach is now a National Heritage Site and popular location for film and television production. It is also home to the British Columbia Museum of Mining, opened 1 year after the mine closed.
There's no annual remembrance event or ceremony or anything of that nature, but for Britannia residents, former and current, anybody who has lived or experienced Britannia or has any knowledge of Britannia history, it's always something that's on your mind. It will never be a forgotten part of Britannia's history.
And in the end, Darwin's Cyclone Tracy is recorded as one of the worst disasters in Australian history, forever changing the lives of those who encountered it.
I'll never ever take a cyclone lightly again. I'll never ever think, that it's nothing. It was just unbelievable.
I had different values. Like, I used to value things. I was a hoarder. I kept all my things from high school and everything else, and there's more to life than things, material things. They can be wiped out in just one day.